I have a hard time explaining a vision. I continue to struggle with that today. The way that I explain it is by creating it and demonstrating it. Working in a medium where, yes, you're limited to the screen, but beyond the screen, there's actually no limit to what you can create. Anything that you want to come up with code, you can make it happen. People would come in and be like, why are people paying $200 for these stupid pixelated images? And I'd be like, well, hold on a second. Okay, let me tell you. First of all, it's generative art. That's a hard one to swallow because just putting the word art next to CryptoPunks, especially at the time, I really struggled with that. One of the most important parts about, Web3 or kind of this ecosystem is that it is so important that you are additive before you're extractive, before you sell something.
One of the things I always come back to is hearing MP Cause talk about one of his favorite parts of it is he really feels like it's a collaboration between him and the machine.
The artwork does not exist until the collector buys it. The algorithm exists on the blockchain, and then the collector comes and makes a purchase. It generates a new NFT token. And at the moment of that generation, the blockchain provides the randomness and the blockchain provides the script and creates the final output.
Similarly, there's a reason that art is kind of the tip of the spear in terms of ownership, right? It's very simple value exchange. You make something, I look at it, I like it, we exchange value, right? Art is code is art, all the way to you can own something digital and how is it unique? And can't I just right click save as?
When you go to display an art blocks piece, the ideal way of displaying an art blocks piece is to run it live in the browser. There's no better way to display an art blocks piece. I started feeling very similar to how I felt in 2017 with like the initial craze of just shitcoins. Word for them in case you have to bleep out.
No, you don't.
Oh,
you can call them shitcoins.
Cool.
You could say altcoins if you want.
Altcoins, thank you.
Today we would say meme coins, but about
meme
a particular,
coins, Although meme coins have like an artistic kind of vibe to them,
no, exactly.
Cool.
Okay, well, that's another topic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ledger podcast. I'm Mo, and I'm super happy to be bringing you a conversation today between Ian Rogers, Chief Experience Officer at Ledger, and Snowfro, aka Erick Calderon, the genius behind the Artblocks platform. I think the impact of Artblocks has been nothing short of groundbreaking. How Snowfro and the Artblocks team were able to bring this new form of art is redefining the art world and positioning code as a new form for creative expression. At Ledger, we're also celebrating our 10 years anniversary and the launch of our 106 headquarters. And to mark the occasion, Artblocks will be taking over our lobby and transforming it into the Artblocks Cafe, where a unique activation will be taking place called Generative Goods. This activation blends art with merchandise, and it's only accessible if you come to our office. Today, Erick and Ian will be diving into this and so much more. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation.
Erick Calderon,
Ian,
PKA Snowfro.
PKA.
Yeah,
Wow.
I like that phrase.
What is PKA?
Professionally known as.
Oh my gosh.
You know the first time I saw PKA and I had to figure out what it meant would have been 1996. And before he had a record deal, Kid Rock had business cards that had PKA, Kid Rock, PKA. And I was like, what is that?
That's interesting. You say professionally known as. Sometimes when I think of Snowfro.
That's why I said it. I thought it was kind of ironic.
Yeah, that's super ironic. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. I would really like to start at the beginning, and I'll set it up a little bit because, here at the opening of our building in the lobby right now, we have an Artblocks curated retrospective. And this was my choice, I'll admit, and I say it to you a little sheepishly, a little embarrassing, but my goal is really to build appreciation of this new art form, generative art. So instead of starting with something which was maybe a single collection from a single artist, or maybe something that was a little kind of beyond Artblocks curated, I kind of wanted to start at what I consider to be the beginning in some ways. Obviously not the very beginning of generative art, but certainly, a pinnacle of the movement that started in 2021. So maybe you could tell us, how did Artblocks start, and what is the role of Artblocks curated in the context of Artblocks overall?
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot there. Artblocks started as a hobby. It was just a hobby. I've been tinkering with code. I've been tinkering with blockchain for a while. I'd been in the design space for about 20 years. Artblocks was not started to create this platform for, I guess, the top generative art in the world. Artblocks was started to create a platform for people that tinker in the generative medium to release their work. And what evolved from that was Art Blocks Curated, which is not, I mean, first of all, I didn't think anybody would care, period, about anything Art Blocks. So, I mean, when I was creating it, not only did I have a hard time explaining this to people, potential collectors, but even artists had a really hard time kind of wrapping their head around it.
At that time, so when are we talking here?
2020. So in 2017, I first kind of came up with the idea of Art Blocks. I actually came up with the idea when claiming CryptoPunks and realizing that, in the CryptoPunks claiming process, you get to pick which punk you want. So I was able to go and get the rarest ones that were still there. I was able to just like snipe them one by one. And in that process, knowing what I knew about blockchain technology and knowing what I knew about generative art, I thought, wow, there's a way to make it to where I hit a button that says claim and it randomly picks one for me. And so from that moment, I started thinking about the intersection between an algorithm that creates variable outputs and the blockchain and how it can inject randomization into that. So 2017, Art Blocks didn't launch until 2020. I spent 3 years just trying to figure it out. It evolved dramatically. I had a smart contract for Art Blocks on Chain in 2018. Very different than what Art Blocks looks like today. Spent a lot of time trying to explain to artists and to collectors like what this was, but I have a hard time explaining a vision. I continue to struggle with that today. For me, the way that I explain it is by creating it and demonstrating it. So I spent a little bit of time writing it myself. COVID hit, so I was able to have all this extra time, 3 hours a day extra. I have 2 kids, so stopped going to the gym, stopped going to work, stopped dealing with traffic, and I was able to kind of find these 3 extra hours a day to learn how to really code and built Art Blocks from scratch. And then, in 2020, was able to release it as a way for people that create things with computer code, artistic mostly, that's most of what I was following was artists, and use blockchain technology to distribute it in a way that was very new at the time.
Yeah. So what was the scene like at that moment, and how were because Art Blocks really became kind of a platform and a gathering place for the artists of the time. So where were the artists before? Like, where were you finding them, and how were they working?
Reddit. So I'd been following artists on Reddit, and in fact, Melissa Widerak and Aaron Penny are both artists that I engaged with when I had this idea to create a ceramic tile collection that looked like terrazzo, but instead of it being, pre-existing images printed onto tile, I was like, okay, well, I know that we can draw pebbles with generative. Like, could we make it to where every single tile is different? And so I kind of reached out to each of them individually about potentially kind of doing some kind of collaboration like that. But Reddit, Instagram at the time, I'd been following artists like Tyler Hobbs and Melissa and Aaron, and they were my artistic heroes, at the time. Like, that's the kind of art that I was making myself, and it was just this deep rabbit hole of working in a medium where, yes, you're limited to the screen, but beyond the screen, there's actually no limit to what you can create. Anything that you want to come up with code, you can make it happen. So I'd been following for a while. The vibe, though, in 2020 was very interesting. It was kind of, Art Blocks was launched at the top of this like Top Shot craze. If you remember Top Shot, Deborah Labs came out with
NBA
Top Shot with the basketball cards. In fact, Art Blocks was delayed from launching for about 6 months because I went so deep into that project and started collecting every single card and then multiple sets and engaging with like the community. It was pretty fun. Before that, we had Art Blocks Discord probably had like 25 people in it for 3 years. But I was spending most of my time in the CryptoPunks Discord. So I'd spent about 3 years just kind of onboarding people and helping people understand why CryptoPunks were important, how to set up a wallet. People would come in and be like, why are people paying $200 for these stupid pixelated images? And I'd be like, well, hold on a second. Okay, let me tell you. First of all, it's generative art, and I think that's a hard one to swallow because just putting the word art next to CryptoPunks, especially at the time, I think people really struggled with that. I think today it's recognized as art, which I think is really important. And I think it's because a lot of us were kind of really pushing the art narrative from the beginning, including obviously Matt and John from Larva Labs. Spent a few years just engaging with the community. And I think that's one of the most important parts about, Web3 or kind of this ecosystem is that it is so important that you are additive before you're extractive, before you sell something. And a lot of like looking back, none of this was like premeditated or planned, but I realized that a lot of the success of Artblocks was simply because for 3 years I did nothing but support and help people and walk people through all the things, whether it's picking their favorite punk, because I feel like I knew every punk backwards and forwards, to helping set up a wallet, to if they got scammed, helping them recover a crypto punk before someone took it out, whatever. And then, launching Artblocks, it felt like, it was just one more of the experiments that were happening at the time. So every few weeks, somebody would come into this punk's Discord, because that was the epicenter of everything that was happening in the Ethereum ecosystem, and be like, hey, I've got this project. And, 90% of them are terrible. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. But you give credit for people for tinkering and for messing around. And there started to be more projects, like more artistically defined projects. Nate Alex was just putting out bangers, at the time, just really raw smart contract based artistic projects. Squiggly is a project he did kind of, I think it was early 2020. And yeah, that all kind of led up to releasing Artblocks and kind of it being, I guess, my turn to say, okay, well, here's what I've been working on in the background and DMing people. I mean, I had thousands of DMs with a lot of the people, but it wasn't really public. And then, finally kind of released it and it kind of took off from there.
All right, there's so much I want to double click on here, because I think in that, like, what I like about it is you really wrapped up all of the confluence of events that kind of led to it. And what's interesting is it isn't just one thing. Like you were you had a background in design. You had an interest in collecting, obviously, between CryptoPunks and NBA Top Shots. Like there's sort of that collector mindset that's in there. There's also, though, the artistic part of it, and you said like these were your artistic heroes. And I would like to, for the audience who is really unfamiliar with kind of how generative art works and what makes generative art special, I'd love to hear your take on that. One of the things I always come back to is hearing MP Cause talk about one of his favorite parts of it is he really feels like it's a collaboration between him and the machine. And I think that that's something that people can kind of get their head around in terms of why is it different, right? In other words, I'm not like just sitting in an iPad with a pen and painting. I'm coding, and then I come up with an algorithm, and then, when I hit go, I actually don't know exactly what's going to come out the other side. I have written this code, but at the end of the day, there's an element of chance and happenstance and generation, hence the name that comes into it. So how would you explain to somebody who really has no concept, like they're not a coder, what is generative art, and why was it an interesting art form for you?
That thrill of hitting go and not knowing what you're going to get. And when you get something that like jumps off the page, that feeling is something that I think drives a lot of us as generative artists. So generative art, if you really, really kind of want to boil it down, first of all, it's been, a thing since the 1960s. People have been making art with computer code since before there was a computer monitor attached to the keyboard, right? Like you'd type into a mainframe and you'd walk away and come back and see the result like after the fact. And that's pioneers like Vera Molnar and Herbert Franke. What they were looking for was the computer to automate. And if you look at, for example, Manfred Moore's work, where he'll take something as simple as a cube and dissect it into various different ways of presenting that cube. Yes, by hand, we could have done the geometry and recreated those cubes, but with a few keystrokes, he was able to dissect something basic like a cube object and display it in a lot of different ways. And at the time, we used plotting a lot to kind of show the variability. So automation and variability go hand in hand. We have the opportunity with generative art to demonstrate the variability that artwork can have. So when you paint something, you paint it and that's it. It's like the single piece and it's beautiful. I love one-of-one art. Nothing wrong with that. But when you create with computer code, you're essentially creating a framework of instructions for the painting instead of the painting itself. And if you wanted to make a one-of-one generative work, you drop the word generative, you just replace it with algorithmic. If you wanted to make a one-of-one work, you can do that. You can write a line of code that says draw a red square and save the output, and that's the artwork. Done. But because of the nature of computer code, you can then say, replace the word red with purple, yellow, green. And every time you run the code, you replace that word, you replace it, and the output changes. And then if you take it the next step, and this is kind of where we get into generative, you say, draw a blank square and replace blank with a random color. And so now every time you run it, the computer is randomly picking a color and assigning it to that square. I'm really boiling it down here to make it super simple, but that's the basis of generative art, is that when you talked about MPK's not knowing what he's going to see, there's actually two layers to it. One of them is this finessing of computer code where, yes, I know that if I write the code to draw a rectangle, it's going to draw a rectangle. But when you start getting into like the nitty gritty of code, sometimes you're like, I kind of want it to flow this way. And then you do the code to make it do that, and it actually flows this way. And you're like, damn it, no, okay. So then you go back and you like make it flow this way. As the algorithms get more complex, you don't even know what the code that you're writing, you know what your intention is, but unless you get it right on the first try, and maybe some of these like master, generative artists get it right on the first time, but you often don't even get it right on the first time. And so you don't know what you're going to get based on the code that you put in. And then you add the layer of randomness. And this is where the blockchain is so powerful, because the blockchain can generate entropy or randomness in a way that injects it into your code so that everybody that buys an output from your algorithm gets something unique. And that's the second side of not knowing what you're going to get. So you have the artist co-creating with the computer. They're collaborating, and the back and forth, getting the algorithm parameterized, like getting it to where the instructions are in the right place, and I'm happy with the randomization values that are going to happen within this algorithm. And then you actually add the collector. And that's where I think that's what's so powerful about art blocks and just generative art using blockchain technology in general. The collector then comes in and executes the purchase and creates the actual artwork. The artwork does not exist until the collector buys it. So what happens is, the algorithm exists on the blockchain, and then the collector comes and makes a purchase. It generates a new NFT token. And at the moment of that generation, the blockchain provides the randomness, and the blockchain provides the script and creates the final output. So you have this co-creation with the collector. And there's a couple sides to that. Number one, it's a pretty special feeling knowing as the collector, you completed the process. You were the last step in completing the process. The artist has no idea what the final output's going to look like. Neither you nor the artist know what's going to happen until it's created. And then the process of storing that, like the process of kind of keeping that piece alive, is eternal on the blockchain, because all of that is recorded permanently as well. And when you put all those things together, you end up with like a new process for creating art that really didn't exist before. Where last point on this is, I think it's totally fine if you have good taste or if you have bad taste. Like, no one's going to question that. But a lot of people have no taste, and they want to have taste. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this type of generating art is that you can kind of agree with consensus that you like this project. But if you also had to decide if you want yours to be yellow or green or blue, then there's a part where you're imposing your own personal taste or aesthetics onto something. And I think people struggle with that, especially early on in their art collecting career. And so where the kind of random generation of an art blocks piece kind of comes into play is extracting the need for the collector to actually make a very deliberate aesthetic decision on the final output. They're agreeing that they want to own one of the pieces of this collection. But beyond that, everything else is done randomly. And so they're presented with the work, and if they just hate it, we're in a 24/7 permissionless ecosystem. You can just list it for sale. But generally, you're buying into an artwork where you're satisfied or excited about anything that the algorithm could provide.
I love it because you really you captured what's interesting about it for both the artist and the collector, and also I think it's something that couldn't have existed previously. So 15 years ago, Satoshi Nakamoto solved the Byzantine generals problem and gave us digital ownership, permissionless digital ownership, right? And as that evolved, we got smart contracts, and the question is, what can you do with ownership? Well, I mean, I in some ways, I've felt like, I did digital music for 20 years, and I think it was interesting that digital music was always kind of 10 years ahead in terms of disruption of other mediums. We had Napster in 1999, and it was 2010 that a lot of other things seem to get disrupted. So I think that there are reasons that music was the tip of the spear, but I think it's just because it was kind of simple. They're relatively small files. You don't need a frame rate, and every college age human being likes music, right? So it's an easy thing here. I think similarly, there's a reason that art is kind of the tip of the spear in terms of ownership, right? It's very simple value exchange. You make something, I look at it, I like it, we exchange value, right? And then, what generative art and ultimately art blocks have done is add kind of layers on top of that. So I just want to restate what you said to make sure the audience understands, because I think that you captured the essence of it, which is I'm an artist, but I'm an artist and my art is code. The way that I draw is by writing code. And so I write this code and I can test the code, and I can use art. Let's say I'm using art blocks as the platform to code on. I use art blocks as kind of the harness in a way to test that and inject that randomness and entropy, so that I can see like what happens now. What happens now? What happens now? And so I spend all that time with it. And as you said, I get comfortable with where the randomness can take me. I still don't know exactly where it's going to go. And then when I release, I'm actually really rolling the dice, because I don't know what's going to come out. What I'm doing is I'm selling artworks that I haven't seen to someone who also hasn't seen them, to someone who's willing to take that leap with me. And then you get this interaction between the collector and the artist. So the collector says, here I go. And they buy. And when they buy, the randomness comes in, the piece is generated, and then it lives forever in that permissionless digital ownership way that was really created in the Bitcoin white paper and then built on top of in the case of art blocks, ultimately the Ethereum ecosystem. And then it lives in this world of digital scarcity. So I think that a reason I want to lay all that out there, because I think you and I, who have kind of walked this path for the past 10 plus years, almost take it for granted, but there are multiple layers of confusing things in there for other people. Wait, art is code is art, all the way to you can own something digital, and how is it unique, and can't I just right click save as? The question I wanted to ask you as the other side of that is, what is it that I own when I've bought this piece, and how do I display it?
That's a great level. So you have a spectrum, right? We can talk about what you own on the technical level, right? So you own an NFT, and an NFT is essentially just a line item in a smart contract that says that you own a token with a specific ID. Okay, and a typical NFT, what you own is a token that points to IPFS or some other storage system, and that storage system stores the actual image. This is something really important, I think, about art blocks, where from a technical perspective, we're selling a technically higher quality NFT, and from a technical perspective in terms of its ability to reproduce the work. So instead of pointing to an image that's off-chain with a hash that verifies your ownership excellently, when you own an art blocks NFT, you're owning the information required to reproduce the entire artwork.
I remember
from
explaining
information
this,
stored on chain.
I remember explaining this to Ben I don't know once, by the way, which is a highlight of where he was, because he wanted to know what he wanted to know what the quality was. Yeah. What is it? I said, in the case of generative art such as art blocks, and he's an engineer, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think he got it. I said, you actually own the code. So if tomorrow the display, technology changes, that same code could produce something that,
and that's the next level of, you're asking, how do I display it? For better or worse, I've been super strict with art blocks, especially on curated, that the artist creates code that's resolution agnostic. And what that means is that, I've grown up with always trying to be at the cutting edge of technology, which means that I've often found myself with files that are not at the level of that next level of technology. So whether it's having a 4K television and having a video that was recorded at regular definition, and either it'd be upsampled or it's smaller than the size of the screen.
I have some SideQuest drives with old Grand Royal mags on them, if in Quark format. If anybody wants,
format.
I know,
Wow.
but yeah, I'm proving your point. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's just it. I mean, with sound, it was just a matter of the cost of storage, and then audio files till today will look at a record as being like their preferred.
Yeah, no, I mean
that's audio quality, right?
There's a vinyl album which is analog in a groove, or there is even super high quality audio is just tens of thousands of pictures of the audio at
Exactly.
It's still not the audio.
It's still compressed. Like there's still some kind of
there's
like
still a
compression.
resolution choice has been made.
The difference, obviously, is the level of audiophile you have to be to understand the difference between those things, right?
Yeah.
And whereas it's not really hard to look at a GIF that was made in I don't know when they started making GIFs in 1999 on a 4K screen and realize that it's bad. Like the resolution, it has to be upsampled. So with art blocks, we asked the artist to, at the beginning of this is where there's so many layers why working with code is so powerful. Another reason I started art blocks is because I realized that you can't store images on the blockchain without spending a tremendous amount of money. But like we know how to create 500 megabyte images using code if we want to, right? So the same piece of code can write an image that's 640 by 480 pixels or whatever size you want. And so we asked the artist at the beginning of their algorithm to query the size of the screen and then build the artwork based on the size of the screen. And what that means is that in today's kind of 4K world, the algorithm is going to populate the entire 4K screen pixel perfect. And then when 8K screens become more normal, or 24K screens, or 128K screens, assuming we have the processing power to manage that. Because right now, we struggle, like just within the browser, Google will not render after a certain, Google Chrome struggles with rendering. It has nothing to do with the algorithm. It's just like, it's probably asking, why on earth is somebody asking me to like make a screen this size, right? So that goes to the display side of this, which is what you own this NFT. The NFT has the information necessary to reproduce the artwork from scratch. And then you want to display it somewhere. A lot of times, and I use this as an example, Ringers is one of my favorite projects on art blocks, and Ringers is a static generative artwork. In other words, when you open a Ringers on a browser window, it is not moving. So the idea of opening a PNG that is stored, like kind of a rendering of that Ringers, and opening the live script, they're both going to look identical to each other. But the real artwork, what you're viewing as the real artwork, would be not the pre-generated PNG, even though they're literally pixel perfect identical to each other, but the live code running in the browser. Technically, if you're showing it on a random screen, it doesn't matter. No one's going to know the difference except for maybe me and the person that set up the screen. But the artwork is the result of running all of that code with the hash string that was generated for you on Mint in a browser window. And whereas for a PNG, for a static one, it's not that big of a deal. You have a lot. What that enables an artist to do when you're running live code in a window is to have interactive and immersive pieces. And so there's a lot of artworks that have. So for example, the Chromie Squiggle is an artwork that I launched art blocks with. I included these things as Easter eggs to demonstrate what algorithmic art can do. So the Chromie Squiggle renders, like you pull it up and it's a static image. And to demonstrate, because it did blow people's minds initially because they just saw it as a static image. And then I was like, click it, like open it and click it. And like, what do you mean click it? Because in their mind, they're just looking at a JPEG. And then it starts to animate. And so press the space bar and it changes the background color. Coming from a background of design, I know that I want to constrain how people view my art, but I want to give people a little bit of flexibility. Because if you look at a Chromie Squiggle in a bedroom, you don't want it to have the white background because otherwise your whole bedroom is lit up. It's like you have a big bright light. So like you want to change it back to a black background. There's different settings where you want to be able to change the background color. And I wanted to demonstrate with generative art the opportunity for you to interact with it, but also hand to the user a certain amount of parameters that they can control, that I as the artist am signing off on, saying, yes, this is okay. And in this case, it's the background color, the animation speed, or the fact whether it's animated or not. So when you go to display an art blocks piece, the ideal way of displaying an art blocks piece is to run it live in the browser. There's no better way to display an art blocks piece because it's going to check how big your browser window is, and it's going to fill it up with the code pixel perfect to accommodate that size of a browser screen. If you record an animation of it, it's okay. Literally 99.9% of people will never know the difference, but you will, and I will.
And you know what's amazing about this, Eric? Like I'm having a revelation. I mean, we talked about this yesterday because we installed all of this here and at Ledger and put things on screens and screens. If you get just a screen, they're optimized for video. They're not optimized for running a browser that runs code. So very difficult. We've basically used little nukes to on the back to just to run a browser and to actually run the live code. And so you come to this realization that here's an art form and there really is no way to display it in a room that's kind of off the shelf. I mean, it's very
tough.
And so I apologize. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But I remember, I'm just going to say this out loud. In 2005,
I've never heard that expression.
In 2005, I made the first $5 a month all you can eat music subscription service.
Oh wow!
Right. It had a fatal flaw. The iPhone didn't come until 2008, right? So it was a great idea, unlimited streaming music, and it worked for Windows only.
Oh wow!
Right, and so it was absolutely the right idea. There just was no audience for it yet, right? And we did it at Yahoo. It's not even like we were a small company doing it. And so I'm having the same kind of revelation here that you have an art form and it's amazing what you just described, that you have, and it's not just an art form, it's an interactive art form. And there's one place to look at it, on your PC. Yeah, guess what? No one wants to look at art on their PC. So this is just where we are in time. And I think, it seems very clear to me that ultimately, imagine what it's like when we actually have the way to live with this art and not just collect it. Right now, I think what OpenSea blew open in 2021 is exactly what you said earlier. You've got this 24/7, always on, permissionless marketplace where I can see what you own, you can see what I own, I can put a bid on something you own, I can, you can accept that bid, and we created a marketplace. And I want to be sure that we have time to talk about because I want to ask you one more question about art blocks and generative art before we get to generative goods, because I want to look toward the future more. But the first time that I met you, I was really struck by how, and this is a huge compliment, out of place you were in the world of crypto. Because what's interesting, and it comes out in this conversation, is you do have the collector mindset. You do care a lot about art and artists. But what surprised me, that you said the first time I spoke to you over video, because those days in art block, I was very difficult to even score an art blocks piece. There was literally, I remember, when I got my memories of Chilin, I had to learn how to go into a different mempool.
Oh my gosh!
Right, to spend enough gas, to win one, and which means to pay whatever the going price was, right? And you had said to me that you really disliked your popularity, basically, and you were like living for the day that things no longer minted out, right? You're actually wishing to be less successful, and I think it says something about like your ethos. This has never been a cash grab for you. So I think I was curious for you to reflect on. We definitely had a gold rush, and then the bottom fell out of the market. How do you characterize that roller coaster ride, and where is it for you?
I think there was a time where there was plausible deniability of what you could expect, right? Like that's very different today in Web3. Now, I mean, so I had Larva Labs to learn from, Matt and John, the kind of insanity that happened in their Discord when the prices started going up. I also had a couple of cycles of being in crypto since 2017 to kind of understand the cyclical nature of this. And I had no idea that anybody was going to care about what I created. In fact, from the feedback I got leading up to launching Art Blocks, my impression is definitely no one's ever going to care. And but like, I wanted to do it. Like, this is my hobby. This is my, like how I want to spend my time. And I was going to tinker and do it. When things started picking up, I started feeling very similar to how I felt in 2017 with like the initial craze of just shitcoins, or what's another word for them in case you have to bleep out?
No, you don't.
Oh,
you can call them
right.
shit coins.
Cool.
You could say altcoins if you want.
Altcoins, thank you.
Today we would say meme coins, but about
meme
a particular,
coins,
particular.
Although meme coins have like an artistic
kind of
vibe to them,
no,
which is
exactly.
cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's another topic. Next podcast.
Next podcast. So yeah, I mean, I felt that same rush, which is exciting. I've watched that rush happen to other people and been excited for them. And then when it happens to you, it's actually not. I mean, it was like, yes, people were excited about my work. I think the most exciting part is people were excited about these artists' works. Like, so people were excited about the idea, the concept, the platform, but these artists, and I say this pretty often, but to me, there's no more authentic art form than one where a cohort of artists have been making art in that form with absolutely zero opportunity for monetization, with the exception of like a $50 print here and there off their little like off their Shopify website that they had built. These artists were making since the 60s, and there was a little bit of a flare up of like interest in digital art, but it was very rare, back in the early days. These artists were making art because they loved it, because there was no way that they were ever going to monetize it. And seeing them not just monetize this passion that they had, but monetize it in this way where we today, when we think about contemporary art, it's making art of the times, using the tools that we have at our disposal today. And at that moment, and I think still today, this is the intersection of using the tools that we as artists have today to the max. And now as we've kind of gone into AI, it's like the next generation of tools that we have today. It's the definition of contemporary art. So watching that happen felt really good, but it didn't feel good because of the amount of money coming in. Because if you've been through these cycles, you recognize that it was not sustainable. Like it was kind of an insane proposition. And we are in a weird place at Art Blocks because we had already kind of scheduled projects out into the future. So it's really hard to tell an artist, you know what, this is making too much money. We need to pull the plug on. Like it's so counterintuitive. And yeah, you could say as a company, you have to make money as a company. And of course, I would like Art Blocks to be profitable, but Art Blocks today would be in a much better place psychologically, first of all, and probably just in the trajectory of a company if we didn't have this crazy peak that happened. That crazy peak was helpful in that it gave us some cash to still be operating. A lot of companies are struggling to operate in the ecosystem today. Artists had a really nice inflow of capital after years of grinding away at the generative medium with literally no monetization. So that felt good, but it wasn't sustainable. And I remember, in hiring team members in ArtNet articles, and like as I was in every person from outside Web3 that interviewed me, I'd be like, this is not sustainable and this is dangerous and people are going to get hurt. So knowing that people are going to get hurt, it does not feel good.
Yeah. No
matter how much money is coming in. And part of what I did to kind of help psychologically offset that was recognize the opportunity for crypto to help to channel funds to charity. So in that first year of Art Blocks facilitated artists to donate over $50 million to charity. Why? Because even the artists recognized that it was a completely surreal amount of money that was kind of coming in, and we wanted to spread that out. So it wasn't sustainable. It didn't feel good. It was exciting. It was a thrill. People cared about this thing that I made that, from a validation perspective, I was like, oh yes, this is great. But And right now it's tough, right? Right now it's really tough for anybody in Web3 to be making money. Artists got this taste of what it would be like to be a full-time artist, might have quit their job and recognize that they might have to go get a job again. That doesn't mean that's the end of their career. That might just mean that it might be a normal trajectory towards an artist career instead of the madness that happened in the past. But I'm just as excited, if not more, than I was in the past. And yeah, we have to figure out how to be a profitable company, and we have to, most people in Web3 have to figure out how to be profitable. But if you take out the financials, we have this phrase up only, right? Like in Web3, for the generative artist, for the digital, forget generative, for the digital artist as a whole, if you take out the financials, it has been up only. We have our art being exhibited at major institutions all over the world, collected by institutions and major art collectors all over the world. The narrative has shifted away from the financials, away from the big headlines, to the content. The narrative has shifted away from the technology, the NFT, to the content. And that, to me, feels like the best possible place that we can be. And while we might have to grow a little slower, that's actually normal. That's how normal business is. Yeah. That's how normal things happen once you kind of get past the initial bubble. So I'm really excited about where we are today. It's demoralizing to see the numbers. Obviously, when money's not coming in, it hurts. Like at the artist level, the team level, the company level, whatever. But I'm trying to picture back 5 years ago, if you were to tell me that we'd be sitting here talking about this, I would have been like, dude, you're absolutely batshit crazy. We need to recognize that. We need to appreciate that, I think, and remind ourselves just how beautiful the life of digital art has been over the last few years, and how, because of that bubble, it got it closer to being mainstream and commonplace.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's a couple things I'd like to add to share to artists, specifically based on things I've seen. One is what you said about the market. I mentioned this in a podcast yesterday, but there's this great book from Carlota Perez called Technological Revolutions, and she goes through 8 different technological revolutions or thereabouts, and every time there is a bubble, the bubble bursts, and then you get 30 years of sustained growth. And that's what you're describing, this very natural phenomenon where everybody thinks the future is already here, turns out it's not. And then the future does come, and it comes slowly and naturally, right? Yeah. So I think people need to acknowledge that. And I think, to your point, it is just incredible. And I think that's why I wanted to spend a bit of time on the technological earlier, because I encounter even people who are interested in the space and paying attention, but don't necessarily understand the difference between a static PNG and an on-chain piece of art, right? And just like at Ledger, we always say, if not self-custody, why crypto? And that's one of those things where I think a lot of people don't really. It's a philosophical question at the end of the day, not really a question about how you store your currency. It's about is your good permissionless or not, right? It's a similar thing. There's in other words, you have an art form which is not, still not broadly appreciated as an art form. That's code. The code can be art, but it is more and more appreciated. To your point, and that's really the only thing that we can ask for. But the last thing I wanted to point out, because it's something that, I built a company called Topspin in the 2000s, and it was all about direct to consumer marketing and commerce, mostly for artists. And the challenge is that you always have far more aspirants than you do success stories. And that's the thing that people can't get their head around, right? They think either everyone is going to be successful or no one is going to be successful, but that's never the way it is. There are 100 million songs on Spotify and probably only 1 million that people love. Yeah. And that's the way it works, right? I mean, most books are terrible. Most movies are terrible. Most people are people you don't want to be friends with, right? And that doesn't mean, just because 99% of all music on Spotify is bad, you don't say music is bad, and this is the thing that I always, whenever someone tries to make a judgment on AI art, I'm like, please do your job. Find the 1% that's awesome.
Exactly.
Don't tell me about the 99. I promise you 99% sucks. Yeah. 99% sucks. You don't have to tell me.
Yeah.
Now, show me one of the 1% is sort of where I go with that. So I agree. Super. It's like, we're definitely, it is up only. I like that. I really like that way of looking at it. And that's not about money. But I mean, so I want to, in the time we have left, I want to hear about generative goods and where you're going and why. Why is this the next thing for you beyond art blocks?
Man, generative goods is kind of the culmination of being here and realizing that the only way that we can grow a sustainable presence in this world with the generative medium is to make the generative medium mainstream and commonplace with consumers. And what that means is not talking about NFTs and maybe not even talking about generative, right? So the idea that people, I have this kind of thesis that's, if in a world where it costs the same amount of money to make a million things that are unique as it costs to make a million things that are the same, all else held equal, and if they are the same price, humans will generally choose the one that's unique versus the one that's identical, as long as the one that's unique is clearly part of the same family. So Chromie Squiggle, you can see a Chromie Squiggle, you know that it's a Chromie Squiggle, and you know that yours is unique from everybody else's. And so it can be a conversation topic. It's like, oh, yours ends with an up, or yours is, ribbed, whatever those, the different features are. But the thing is, the Chromie Squiggle was $20 when it came out. That was the price point at which people were willing to kind of dip their toes in the water and figure out what was going on. The very nature of blockchain technology is also really leaning into scarcity. But consumer goods, no one says, I'm not going to buy that hat because, man, they probably made like 50 million of those hats and I don't want one if everybody else has that hat. Consumers look at a hat and they're like, that's a cool hat. I want to buy that hat. It's $35. It's not $3,500. It's $35. And so what generative goods is trying to do is trying to marry the generative medium, the automation, the same idea of what we talked earlier with like being able to like show variability using automation and computer code and blockchain information into just everyday goods, like physical goods specifically. And the other side of this thesis for generative goods is this idea of kind of Trojan horsing the technology to the mainstream consumer, because it's really hard for people to care right now about the technology. And long term, I do believe that people won't be using the word NFT. I believe long term that people, when they receive something digital of any value, whether it's sentimental or financial, they will just assume that it's being underpinned by blockchain technology. You would be shocked if I were to buy an artwork in the future and we're not like transferring NFTs in the normal way. Maybe it's like you attach an NFT to an email, right? But like it actually does the blockchain transactions in the background. You're going to assume that artwork that you received is an NFT because I paid $1,000 for it. And it would be nuts for it to be not an NFT and it could exist on 50 people's computers at the same time and I don't even know who has it. That was an aside. So if you consider the fact that most people don't need to understand the technology, people do resonate with things that are unique to them. We've demonstrated this with art blocks. We've demonstrated this with every PFP project. People like to show a CryptoPunk that's unique to them, that starts becoming their persona, but it's clearly a punk and they're clearly part of the punk family.
Yeah.
Same with Squiggles. Like
by the way, I don't want a CryptoPunks t-shirt. I want my CryptoPunk.
You want your CryptoPunk t-shirt. And so, but a lot of those things are just completely inaccessible to the average consumer today. So what we're trying to do with generative goods is create a place, like a safe place to experience ownership of artwork, not ownership of NFTs, not ownership of generative artwork, because I think those words don't really matter to people. Experience ownership of artwork. And the way that I believe that we can do that is this other kind of weird thesis that I have for generative goods, which is the digital optional, physical optional model, that says that people have different ways of entering and learning and engaging, but it shouldn't be either purely digital NFT, show my NFT on my phone. It also may not be physical. There are people that are going to be perfectly happy buying a digital artwork and just keeping it on their computer and operating the blockchain and interacting with a normal mint in the way that Artblocks mints things. There's people that are going to see a hat and be like, that's a cool hat. And maybe the hat comes with like a tag that represents the ownership of the digital artwork, as we're kind of doing here. Maybe they want to throw that away because they just saw the hat and they like the hat and they want to keep the hat. And that's perfectly acceptable too. But I see this opportunity where, that tag that owns the artwork, the tag itself kind of owns it until you transfer it to your ledger. Throw that in a drawer. Don't throw it away. Throw it in a drawer. And in a few years, when all of this becomes a little bit more natural and normal, and we're not having to like do the work that it takes to secure your wallet. Also, we're talking about like an artwork that's a $5-10 artwork, right? Not like a $10,000 artwork. You have a drawer full of these really cool ownership, but like associations of an artwork, and you can start participating when you're ready on your time. And I think that's the hard part. Oh, you like generative art? Go do all these steps that you need to do to get it. And by the way, don't get scammed. And not everybody's going to get their ledger on their first try. They're going to download MetaMask. They're going to screenshot their seed phrase. They're accidentally going to like upload it to Google Cloud or whatever Apple Cloud. And at some point, when that artwork that they bought for $20 is worth $100,000 because this is the weird world that we're in, they're going to get scammed. They're going to lose their stuff. It's a lot of steps. And so with generative goods, we're just trying to kind of completely abstract the technology. But I have zero desire in creating generative content that does not include the technology. Because to me, it's kind of like if you get a car that keeps you in your lane, and maybe like my dad's like, I hate it when it does that, turn that off. It's like, well, just because you don't like it doesn't mean I shouldn't have this technology. So we include the technology, but we abstract it and we wait until you are ready to participate. In your case, you buy a ledger today, you're ready to participate, but people aren't here yet. So, and yeah, we just want to use automation in a way that allows people to represent themselves, express themselves as individuals, unique individuals, within a family of work, and we're just testing out the market and seeing how it goes.
I like building this bridge between digital and physical, and its ownership in both cases, right? So physical ownership we're completely used to. I go to Lids, I buy a hat, and I own it.
Yeah.
Right. Digital we're not so used to. I go to Google image search or Giphy, and no, I don't own anything there. So so by putting those two things together and giving people the option and giving them, the use case, and kind of building a platform to do it, I'm super interested to see where it goes. So we're testing it here. I want to, I'm going to invite the audience actually to come to our office. And this is a sincere invitation. This is not just like a VIP invitation. If you know somebody, send them a DM and maybe you'll get a tour. But no. Walk in off the street, 106 Rue du Temple in Paris. And we're going to have a vending machine where you can buy what? Tell us what it is and what people get when they do it.
People, I think I come from collecting, even before collecting the stuff we talked about earlier, I collected baseball cards and comic books and like lighters and decks of playing cards. I mean, I collect my whole life, and I love all the digital stuff, but generally we like to touch things. And so what we have here is we have these, what we're calling kind of digital access cards, or they're collectible cards. They're really thick. They have an NFC sticker on them. And they're all unique. And so what we did with this project is we pre-generated 1,000 generative artworks that have a sunset with an Eiffel Tower in front of it, and they say Ledger on them. We pre-generated them, pre-printed them on cards, and pre-associated the digital artwork, the NFT, to the cards. And so when you buy a card, you're essentially buying ownership of that NFT. Where generative goods kind of comes into the physical component is that all of the information necessary to embroider that output onto a hat or a shirt is embedded into not the PNG, but the live running script in your browser. And so this is just demonstrating once again what we can do with like generative work, where anybody with an embroidery machine can take and download that information and embroider that same exact piece to the exact specifications as it's intended. And so we're inviting the users to kind of participate in representing themselves as individuals, but it starts with just the artwork. And so you can buy the card from the vending machine. You can tap it. If you are connected to Web3, you can withdraw it into your wallet. But otherwise, from the card, there's a little button, because the card owns the NFT until you transfer it out. So there's a little button when you tap the card. It says, make this into a hat. You press it, $35. It ends up in your shopping cart. One more button, and then a week later, you receive a hat with your artwork in the mail. And we're just trying to help people understand, again, if we abstract the NFT technology, we're just talking about digital art ownership, and help people understand that if you own that artwork, you are entitled to the physical. Only if you own that artwork do you have access to that physical, whether you download the DST file and embroider it yourself, or whether you let generative goods fulfill it for you. So that's the experience that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're just getting started. It's the most basic form of using this technology, because you guys are the first and we're so excited to get to work with you guys. But what's really exciting is now Ledger has the opportunity to continue to update that experience. Everyone that has that card, they will tap that card and be presented with the microsite of that NFT. And then over time, we can evolve that experience. And so you can, reach out to your audience and be like, hey, we randomly picked 10 people to give a free hat to.
Right.
Go tap your card.
So we have a connection to those people as well. It's an on-chain connection, and we could have other products we can introduce later on. It could be if you would like to laser engrave your design on the back of your stacks, you could do that.
Would be cool.
So I think I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but unfortunately we're out of time. And but I also say, like, this is interactive already, because people can come in off the street. Go to, here we are at 106 Rue du Temple here in Paris. You're going to come to Paris. You're going to get a souvenir when you come to Paris. This is the best souvenir in Paris, I think.
I think this is the best souvenir in Paris. So, I think, yeah.
Come on in. And then I agree with you. It's just the beginning, and just we see where it goes. I love we covered art blocks and where that went, and we're starting on this generative goods piece, and then we see where that one goes. Erick, I can't thank you enough. And I don't mean for this hour. I mean for really everything that you've brought, and also just the the idealism that you bring to the space. I really truly appreciate it.
I couldn't thank you enough for what you bring as well, man. You really, the energy that you bring and like the understanding it's pretty powerful. We need more Ians.
Sharing is caring.
There you go.
All right, man. Thank you. Thanks again.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching and listening to our Ledger podcast. It's a newly produced format that we brought exclusively to you for the launch of our 106 headquarters, and obviously for Ledger's 10-year anniversary. You've listened to different conversations throughout the past few days, and we've got so much more coming for you. So don't forget to like, subscribe, follow the show wherever you're listening to it, and help us help you make the best out of our content.